The Dow drops on Tuesday, but tries again for another rally in off market hours. The oil starts to rally in anticipation of a meeting between Trump, Russia, and Saudi Arabia. Schools could be open by fall, according to a surprising source of this entire pandemic. Hydroxychloroquine remains under the microscope from everybody. Wisconsin has an election and everybody loses their mind. And Newsweek has some advice about what Biden should do to beat Trump. I am Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary. Most common thing I forget to do when I start this stream. Ready? Change the title. I hit the go live button and then I realized that I still have the old title on from whatever I was doing the day before. And I do feel kind of dumb when it happens, but such is life. I get a little bitty streams that I gotta go and privatize in the YouTube channel here. Anyway, I am Jay Edgar. This is Contemporary. We've got a lot to talk about here today, including my take on the election that happened in this state yesterday. But before we get into any of that, make sure you head on over to freedomscoop.com and check us out over there. We're putting on a 12-hour telethon this week with call-in option. And we've got special guests coming up and sitting in for the day as well. So come and check us out over there. It is going to be myself, the Generational Gap, Stephen Ignoramus, Wyatt Birkenhoff, the R-Rated Conservative, and many, many more. And we are streaming to everybody's channels. So there's going to be plenty of places for you to go and watch it. It's going to be great, and we hope to raise a ton of money for first responders who have suffered through all of this and people who have been furloughed and have lost wages. 15 channels or more, it's going to be great. So come on in and check that out. To start with this morning, our daily dose of Investors Business Daily. This is from Alan R. Elliott. Dow Jones today, futures edge higher. FedEx gets an Amazon boost. Fraud case hammers China stocks. Stock futures added to early gains Wednesday as global markets moved generally lower, and coronavirus news showed a rebound in new U.S. cases and the pandemic's highest daily death toll to date. Stocks most affected by the coronavirus lockdowns continue to dominate early action. Accounting issues placed China-based names under early pressure on the Dow Jones today. Disney stock declined following an analyst downgrade. Dow Jones futures and Nasdaq futures each climbed 1% above fair value. S&P 500 futures improved to a 1.2% gain on the stock market today. Most global markets traded lower, and oil prices staged a moderate bounce as investors looked to an emergency OPEC meeting scheduled for Thursday. Norwegian Cruise Lines Holdings and American Airlines Group rose about 5% each to top the S&P 500. Oil stocks were part of the picture, with Apache and Marathon Oil up in the 5% range. FedEx surged 5%. UPS powered up to nearly 4% after Amazon.com announced it would suspend its delivery service for third-party sellers due to an increased demand. Amazon shares added 0.3% in pre-market trade. American and United Airlines Holdings headed the NASDAQ 100. Wynn Resorts and Marriott International were not far behind. Tesla gained nearly 2%, aiming to add a fourth day to its rally after announcing employee pay cuts and furloughs last Tuesday. So they're trying to save money wherever they can, and they don't have anything coming in apparently. Genmark Diagnostics spiked 18% after increasing its 2020 guidance late Tuesday. Results were bolstered? It says boost red as one word, and I think that they're trying to say bolstered, by a ramped up use of the company's ePlex COVID-19 tests. China-based names packed into the bottom of the NASDAQ 100, Baidu, JD.com, and NetEase all traded between 1% and 3% lower. TAL Education had recovered some ground but remained down 10% after the company became the second China-based name this month to admit to accounting fraud. So that's what's going on around the world. Let's have a look at what's going on in the price of oil. And I went over, and oil is the lowest I've seen it at this market over here. And I didn't think to go into town because it's usually a bit lower in town. I bet you it's hovering right around $1, possibly even below $1 in town. I might have to run down the main highway to go to work today instead of going the back roads just to see what gas is in town. But this is from Fox Business from Jonathan Garber. Oil rallies ahead of Russia-Saudi meeting on price war. Oil prices are bouncing back as traders turn their attention to the upcoming virtual meeting between Saudi Arabia and Russia. West Texas Intermediate crude oil, the U.S. benchmark, climbed 3.6% to 24.47 a barrel. Brent crude, the international benchmark, rose 7 to 32.08, and that's in dollars, not percentage points, so I probably didn't have to say the .47. Russia and Saudi Arabia are set to hold a virtual meeting to discuss production cuts that President Trump has suggested could total 10 million barrels per day. We'll look for at least 10 million and a commitment from non-OPEC of 3 million more, Phil Flynn, senior market analyst at the Price Futures Group, told Fox Business. If prices get worse, it could cause long-term harm to the global economy. Say, you remember a couple of years ago when the only thing that we could think to talk about was the fact that we were going to run out of oil by, 2007? We were going to run out of oil, and we were going to see $30 a gallon for oil or gasoline rather, because there was no oil to be found anywhere. You remember that? I remember that. I was told we were going to be out of oil by now, and we were going to have to find a different way to do things, because we were going to overpump, and there was going to be massive demand for it. Now we are running out of places to store oil, and Saudi Arabia's got the faucet on and just pumping it out as fast as they can get it. WTI crude oil has plunged 63% from its January 6th peak, as the price war between Russia and Saudi Arabia worsened a supply glut amid a period of severe demand destruction caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Following the meeting between OPEC and its allies, energy ministers of G20 nations will meet Friday to discuss the economic damage and the sharp drop in oil prices. The fallout has cost us future supply that we will desperately need in a few years, Flynn said. Oh, so now they are trying to push we're going to run out of oil by X amount again. Weekly inventory data from the American Petroleum Institute released Tuesday evening showed crude stockpiles increased by 11.94 million barrels in the week ended April 3rd, more than 9.3 million barrels that analysts and traders surveyed by the Wall Street Journal were expecting. Last week, inventory swelled by 10.49 million barrels. The inventory build followed the release of an updated 2020 outlook from the Energy Information Administration that projected global demand will fall by 5.2 million barrels a day, as inventories swell by 3.9 million barrels. The EIA sees Brent crude averaging $33 this year, $10 below last month's forecast. EIA officials also forecast the U.S. will become a net importer of crude oil in the third quarter. Well, if it's that cheap, I don't blame them. I know we were an exporter for a while, but for that price, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you indeed? So look for your oil prices to go up, and like I keep saying, if you've got gas cans and a place to store them, or you've got a big tank, fill that shit up on 90 cent a gallon oil, or gasoline. I keep wanting to say oil, but it's gasoline. Fill that shit up as cheap as you can get it, because you're probably never going to see it like this again. And once again, this is the lowest I think I can ever think of, adjusted for inflation. All right. Now we're going to make Dr. Fauci the most hated person in the world, according to school children. Dr. Fauci says U.S. should be able to reopen schools in fall. This is from Tyler Olson. Dr. Anthony Fauci, the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and the face of the White House's coronavirus response, predicted Tuesday night that the United States will be able to reopen its schools in the fall thanks to the expected progress by then in disease mitigation measures for the coronavirus. Fauci made the comments in response to a reporter during the daily White House Coronavirus Task Force briefing. It is unpredictable, but you can get a feel for it if we start talking about the things where the curve goes down, Fauci said. How we respond and what kind of a rebound we see or don't see, I think, is going to have a lot of influence, probably more immediately on things like summer camps than it does in the fall. A summer without summer camps? How are little boys going to lose their innocence and get their first kiss with a little girl from across the pond if we don't have summer camps? Think about what you're doing, Fauci. He continued, I fully expect, though I'm humble enough to know that I can't accurately predict that by the time we get to the fall that we will have this under control, enough that certainly will not be the way it is now where people are shutting schools. The pandemic expert made it clear, however, that the coronavirus isn't going to just go away. He said that he expects by the fall U.S. will have enough herd immunity and have honed its disease mitigation protocols for the coronavirus enough that people will be able to return to public settings. My optimistic side tells me that we'll be able to renew a certain extent, but it's going to be different. Remember now, because this is not going to disappear, Fauci said. So we're going to have in place the capability of doing things that we talk about all the time on this stage to identify, isolate, and to contact trace, number one. Number two, by that time, we'll have a better feel with the antibody test about what the actual penetrance of infection was in the society. How do you test my blood for antibodies without taking my blood? Just curious. Maybe you can't do it, I don't know, but I know a lot of people are talking about the fact that this is our free trial of socialism. It's time for it to go, and nobody's accepting it, but now the government knows what they can do and how to sell a lockdown to people when they need to lock down for people. So I'm a bit worried about what precedent this sets going forward, but at least Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is notoriously the one that says be extra cautious and be extra careful, is saying we could go back to school at this point and have public settings again. Let's talk about the other doctor, Dr. Birx. This is from ABC News from Libby Cathy. Birx avoid treating her grandchild with high fever, cites fear of infecting Trump. That's a headline. That's meant to invoke a certain emotion. White House Coronavirus Task Force Coordinator Dr. Deborah Birx knows how tough the social distancing guideline can be, revealing one sacrifice on Monday that, she says, has personally challenged her. Birx said she opted out of visiting her granddaughter over the weekend despite the 10-month-old having a fever of 105, and Birx feeling a responsibility as the doctor of the family, calling it an illustration of the sacrifices everyone must also take to slow the spread of COVID-19. We need to take care of each other now as Americans and do everything that's in those guidelines. And I know they're tough. I know incredibly how tough they are, Birx said at Monday's briefing. My grandchild of 10 months got a fever of 105 this weekend. I'm the doctor, and I couldn't get there. You're playing doctor to the entire country right now. In more ways than one, but we won't get into the social commentary of this. I'm sure there's another pediatrician that can take care of your infant granddaughter. We're not running out of pediatricians, people. I was trying to explain to my daughter how to listen to her lungs and the babies, Birx continued, before the president interjected. But you did not get there. You did not get there, he asked. I did not go there, Birx emphasized. Good. I'm very happy with that, Trump said. Because of you two, she quickly reminded, gesturing to the president, who is 73, and the vice president, who is 60, both standing within a few feet of her, you can't take that kind of risk with leaders of the country. Trump then mistakenly asked Birx if her grandson was okay, and after she corrected him that it actually was her granddaughter, she added, to the relief of many, that the infant is now coming out of it. That's a lot of temperature, 105, the president said. Birx later said that she probably has Rosalia, a common viral illness in young children, but not COVID-19. Excuse me. Birx later said that she probably... I read that one already. Babies can do that, but it's very scary, especially when I couldn't assure myself she was fine. Birx, who is 64, added, it was just sleepless nights for me and them as they keep their fever down. So Birx is right in that crosshair for the virus too. So for all we know, she went to make sure that she herself was protected as well. But now ABC News wants to spin this as this was protecting the president. So I just thought that story was interesting. Let's see what the Texas Tribune has to say. because hydroxychloroquine is going to be the next villainized thing. And I've got a couple stories to go with that. Texas City nursing home residents with coronavirus being treated with unproven hydroxychloroquine drug. The physician and nursing home medical director who prescribed the drug is a campaign surrogate for President Donald Trump. This is from Emma Platoff and Patrick Zvitek. More than 24 Texas City nursing home residents who have tested positive for the new coronavirus are being treated with hydroxychloroquine, an anti-malarial drug that President Trump has touted as a possible treatment for COVID-19, even as medical experts urge caution because it is yet to be vetted for that purpose through robust clinical trials. The doctor who prescribed it to 27 residents of the resort at Texas City was Robin Armstrong, the nursing home's medical director and prominent GOP activist, who serves as a surrogate for the Trump campaign. The drug's efficacy is being tested at the nursing home, where more than 80 residents and workers have tested positive for the new coronavirus, and its role in treating COVID-19. The patient is debated across the country. The federal government has approved it on an emergency basis in some COVID-19 cases, though medical experts, including some inside the Trump administration, have been far less willing to embrace its widespread use. Armstrong, who said his politics have nothing to do with his practice as a physician, acknowledged that there has not been robust clinical testing of the drug for this purpose, but said he is very familiar with the medication and the risks and benefits it carries. The disease's mortality rate is higher among elderly coronavirus patients, he said, so he wanted to try something proactive to help them heal, to treat folks like I would my mom. He said in an interview Monday evening, "It's a vulnerable population and certainly a judgment call," he said. "It's responsible if you monitor them properly, and that's certainly what we're doing." Many of the patients began the 5-day course of treatment Saturday, and all are still in the nursing home. Armstrong, who serves on the advisory board of the Black Voices for Trump Coalition, is one of Texas's 2 Republican National Committee members. Armstrong said it was too early to say whether the drug was helping. Some patients saw improved oxygen saturation, but he could not say for sure that was a result of the treatment. Governor Greg Abbott shared news about the treatment during the news conference in Austin on Monday morning. "We look forward to updating you as the week progresses about how this drug is aiding or not these patients." So we will see, but this has become the most demonized thing in the world at this point, so let's see what NBC has to say. We know that's going to be objective. Mayo Clinic cardiologist, inexcusable to ignore hydroxychloroquine side effects. While it is safe for most, the drug carries a serious side effect for some, including sudden cardiac arrest. This is from Heidi Przybylak. Any suggestions? I'm sorry, Heidi. I can't pronounce your last name. As the U.S. scales up purchase and use of the drug hydroxychloroquine to treat coronavirus patients, a leading Mayo Clinic cardiologist is sounding a warning. Anyone promoting the drug also needs to flag its rare but serious and potentially fatal side effects. President Donald Trump has repeatedly touted the potential benefits of hydroxychloroquine, which has been approved by the Food and Drug Administration to treat malaria, lupus, and other autoimmune ailments, but hasn't yet been proven effective and safe in treating the coronavirus. "What do you have to lose?" Trump asked Saturday at the White House when pressed by reporters about hydroxychloroquine's effectiveness, and while he suggested that patients consult with their physicians about the treatment, he's also said the drug can help them, but it's not going to hurt them. On Tuesday, we got video playing, but you can't hear it because I've got the desktop audio turned off for you. On Tuesday, when asked about the drug's potential side effects, he downplayed them. "The side effects are the least of it," said Trump. "You're not going to die from this pill," he said. "I say, try it," he said, noting, "I'm not a doctor," and to get physicians' approval. Yeah, that was a cutout quote if I've ever seen one. Absolutely. But the president's reassurance is raising concerns among experts about the dangers of the drug poses to some. After observing the debate over hydroxychloroquine on TV news and in social media, Dr. Michael Ackerman, a genetic cardiologist who is the director of the Mayo Clinic's Winland Smith Rice Genetic Heart Rhythm Clinic, took the unusual step in late March of issuing guidance for physicians. What disturbed me the most was when I was seeing not political officials say these medications are safe, but seeing on the news cardiologists and infectious disease specialists say hydroxychloroquine is completely safe without even mentioning this rare side effect. That's inexcusable, he added. Ackerman and his Mayo Clinic colleagues created cardiac algorithm published in Mayo Clinic Proceedings to help physicians more safely prescribe hydroxychloroquine by identifying patients at greatest risk for drug-induced sudden cardiac death. And here's the kicker right here. You ready? While hydroxychloroquine is likely to be safe for 90% of the population, Ackerman said it posed serious and potentially lethal risks to a small number of those susceptible to heart conditions, especially those with other chronic medical problems already on multiple medications. So, when we heard the fish tank cleaner story, I said on this show, and you can check the archives, I said it, you should not be taking any medication, especially chloroquine, especially if it's fish tank cleaner, but you should not be taking any medication that's not over the counter without first consulting your physician, because your physician knows what medications you are currently on and currently taking. They have your medical chart available, and they know how this is going to react with you because they've got practice with it. And hydroxychloroquine is something that we've been using for years. This is not some new experimental drug that nobody's ever touched before in their lives. This is something that we know. Always consult your physician because they can identify problems like this. They can see what hydroxychloroquine could react with in your system and possibly find another treatment option for you, but they will also know if it will react with any other medication that you're taking and if you could die. Because they've got practice with this drug. They've got tons of practice with this drug. And yet, this is an unproven drug that nobody knows anything about, except for the fact that we've been using it for years. Always consult your physician before taking a medication. Always. Always, always, always. You know why? Because if they get it wrong and you do die from cardiac arrest, then your family can go back after medical malpractice and get that guy out of office for prescribing you something that could kill you. So he doesn't do it to other people. And there are so many other massive things you need to think about when it comes to medicine. But for the most part, this appears to be working. When administered properly, this appears to be working. And you know, as well as I do, that the first time that it doesn't work, it's going to be the biggest headline on NBC, and you're never going to see anything else out of it. They might stop using it for malaria if it doesn't work for COVID. Always consult your physician for medication. Always. Alright, now let's talk about Michigan and what they've got going on. This is from radio.com on behalf of WWJ News Radio 950. Michigan Governor Whitmer is soon expected to announce whether and how long she will extend her stay home, stay safe executive order due to COVID-19. Senate Republicans on Tuesday defeated Democrats' amendment to extend the governor's state of emergency in Michigan by 70 days, as was requested by Whitmer, and instead passed a resolution to extend it by 23 days. After the measure was passed in the Senate, it was approved by the House Tuesday afternoon. Although not as lengthy as the governor wanted, the extension would allow Whitmer to lengthen the duration of her stay-home order, among other things. An announcement on that is expected this week, according to Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist, as Whitmer's initial stay-at-home order is set to expire Monday, April 13th at 11:59 p.m. So how long will it be? Gilchrist and they have a team of health and business leaders working together to figure out how to best move forward. We're going to work closely with them alongside our public health professionals and Dr. Jonay Khaldoon to make a responsible decision on that we can be confident in, Gilchrist told WWJ News Radio 950. But you'll have to stay tuned to see where they're going to land on the stay home, stay safe order because they literally changes every day. So it's interesting too that she wants to go an automatic 70 days on this. I mean, the president has been comfortable saying take it 2-3 weeks at a time, and that's kind of where I would go too because this does change every single day. And we're not saying open it all back up on a specific day, but going a couple weeks at a time gives us a chance to reassess regularly and see whether something is going to be ready, whether we're ready to open the economy back up or whether we need to wait a couple more weeks instead of setting people out for 12 to 18 months and wondering where they're going to go with everything else. So I think the legislature in Michigan's got it right, and I do hope that Wisconsin follows suit. In other news, if you haven't seen your Corona bucks, take heart because there's going to be even more. Pelosi and Schumer push for emergency coronavirus bill with at least $500 billion more in aid. This is from Jacob Pramuk over at CNBC. The top Democrats in Congress pushed Wednesday for an interim emergency coronavirus bill to include at least $500 billion in relief for small businesses, hospitals, states, and food assistance programs. In a joint statement, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer reported another $250 billion in loans to small companies, a sum the Trump administration has requested and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell aims to pass through the Senate on Thursday. It would add to the $350 billion in aid approved as part of the $2 trillion emergency package passed last month. The Trump administration has reported high demand for the loans. Democrats want the stopgap legislation to go further as the coronavirus pandemic rips across the country, stretching healthcare profession or resources and state budgets and shutting down schools and businesses. Pelosi and Schumer called for $250 billion in small business loans, with $125 billion going to community lenders, $100 billion to bolster hospitals and community health centers, with funds going towards the production of coronavirus tests and protective medical equipment, $150 billion for state and local governments. Some officials, such as New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who was managing the epicenter of the U.S. outbreak, said the last congressional bill did not do enough for states battling coronavirus. A 15% increase in the Maximal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program benefit. The Democrat leaders described the bill as separate from one they aimed to pass to expand the provision of the CARES Act. The federal government only started to implement the $2 trillion package, the largest emergency spending plan in U.S. history. After we pass this interim emergency legislation, Congress will move to pass a CARES 2 Act that will extend and expand the bipartisan CARES Act to meet the needs of the American people, Pelosi and Schumer said. CARES 2 must provide transformational relief as the American people weather this assault on their lives and their livelihoods. And that's all good. If you're going to spend from the government, the things that were listed there are good things to spend on. I don't agree with it, but those are good things to spend on. But what other crap is going to be in this bill? What other shit are you going to stuff in there to try and get across to the American people? That's the problem I have with this. Especially when it's those two, and especially with what we saw attempted to get into the CARES Act the first time. So watch out for that. I think that's going to be a battle coming up here. Dan Crenshaw, Texas 2 representative, got in the news this week. This is from Fox News. Dan Crenshaw slams Hillary Clinton tweet, defends Trump coronavirus response. This is from Dom Calicchio over at Fox News. I had an itch on my nose. Sorry. U.S. Representative Dan Crenshaw, Republican Texas, fired back at Hillary Clinton on Tuesday, accusing the former U.S. Secretary of State of once again using the coronavirus outbreak to score political points against President Trump. On Monday, Clinton retweeted a Washington Post story that was critical of Trump and said the U.S. was beset by denial and dysfunction as the coronavirus raged. Clinton's Twitter message quoted from the Post article, "It took 70 days for Trump to treat the coronavirus not as a distant threat or harmless flu strain well under control, but as a lethal force poised to kill tens of thousands of citizens." Then Clinton added the message for her followers. "Replace this man in November," she wrote, referring to the president. "Back off, you creep." That quote sticks in my mind. But Crenshaw responded to Clinton, noting that President Trump restricted travel in January and saved lives while Clinton and the Democrats celebrated his impeachment. "Denial," Crenshaw wrote, "from the man who restricted travel in January and saved lives while your party celebrated his impeachment. You may be confusing him with the Washington Post telling America to get a grip, that COVID-19 wasn't scary and that we should be wary of an aggressive government response." Well, we should always be wary of an aggressive government response, but that we've talked about to death on this show. Crenshaw then provided headlines from 3 Post articles from January and February. "Get a grip, America. The flu is much bigger threat than coronavirus for now," read a Post story from February 1st, written by a Post staffer. "How our brains make coronavirus seem scarier than it is," from another Post story from January 31st, written by a guest commentator from Harvard University. "Why we should be wary of an aggressive government response to coronavirus," read the third headline from a February 3rd Post article, co-authored by 2 academics from Northwestern University. Capping off his Twitter message, Crenshaw posted a Nancy Pelosi message from January 15th in which the speaker is seen handing commemorative pens to fellow Democrats on the day she signed 2 articles of impeachment after the Democrat-led House voted against the president on charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The Senate later acquitted Trump of both charges in an impeachment trial. So, I love it when government officials go back after each other, and why Hillary Clinton thinks she's still relevant, I will never understand, but she does still think that she's relevant, and some of the people over on the left are propping her up as such. Last story about COVID before we get into the Wisconsin gripe that I have here. Trump removes Inspector General tasked with overseeing spending of $2 trillion stimulus package. This is from Benjamin Fearnow over at Newsweek. That is a hell of a last name to have with what the mainstream media is trying to get us to do. I've got to say, I'm sorry, Benjamin, but given the current state of the mainstream media, that is a hell of a last name to have. President Donald Trump on Tuesday removed the head of the federal watchdog panel who was tasked with overseeing how the $2 trillion stimulus money is spent. Well, the law is pretty clear on how it got spent, but they got to have a watchdog in there because the president might spend things. It's our job to spend money that we don't deserve. Glenn Fine, acting Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Defense, was removed from his Pentagon oversight position on Monday by the president. He is set to be potentially replaced by Senior Policy Advisor at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Jason Abend. A spokespeople for the Pentagon told various news outlets and congressional lawmakers in Washington Tuesday. Fine was dismissed from his acting position where he was set to head oversight on how the federal government will implement the coronavirus law and the $2 trillion allocated to curb the country's economic downturn. The president's move is only the latest effort by Trump to proactively ridicule and handpick new members of the federal oversight panels. So, Fine works for the Department of Defense. It is to my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, that the Department of Defense is an executive branch department, therefore Fine worked at the pleasure of the president, not the other way around. I don't know about you, but if I was president, I would want to be able to pick the people that were working under me and not have other people tell me that they are going to work under me. But that's just me. I know that Barack went in and cleaned house when he came into the office. And W went in and cleaned house when he came into the office. And that's not just cabinet, that's various other heads of departments in the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, and many other places in the government. Trump chose not to clean house, but we can see how that worked out for him as well. So now he's going in there and picking the people that he wants to be in there. And I don't know. Isn't that what a boss is supposed to do? Maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe I'm completely wrong on this, but that's just the way that I understand the executive branch. Mr. Fine is no longer on the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. Dorina Allen, a spokeswoman for the Pentagon's IG office, confirmed to Politico and the Washington Post Tuesday afternoon. Yesterday, the president nominated Mr. Jason Abend for the position of DoD Inspector General. Dorina Allen, a spokesperson for the Department of Defense Office of the Inspector General, told The Hill via email Tuesday. The same day, the president also designated Mr. Sean O'Donnell, who is the EPA Inspector General, to serve as the acting DoD IG, in addition to his current duties as the EPA. So, Abend is going through senatorial approval, congressional approval, and the EPA IG is going to be sitting here looking in on this until all that goes through. So, and from what I understand, like I said earlier in the beginning, Glenn Fine was an acting IG. He wasn't actually the nominated IG yet. So apparently he wasn't the guy for the job, and now we're putting another acting one in there while we get an actual official one vetted through Congress. So government, always at work, people. All right, let's talk about Wisconsin. So Wisconsin's primary was yesterday, but there were some other down ballot things that we needed to talk about as well. I went and I voted yesterday, as I said that I was going to. We talked a bit about it while we were playing video games, and we talked a bit about it on Contemporary yesterday. And that was the fastest I've ever been through a voting line in my life. Now, keep in mind, I live in a small town, small town. There aren't a lot of people here, so there weren't a lot of people to be in line in the beginning, but I mean, there were enough that I've had to wait in line at that particular polling place before, but yeah. There was nobody in there. There were just the poll workers were the ones in there, and I ran into one guy on the way out. And that was it. He was on his way out, I was on my way in, and that was the only person that I saw there the whole time that I was there. Mind you, that was at 9 o'clock in the morning, and not everybody was going to rush, but I know that Milwaukee closed down a bunch of polling places due to the COVID, which, long lines, and I don't know, why did Tom Barrett close them all down? Green Bay closed down a bunch of polling locations. These were not decisions that were made on the state level. These were decisions that were made on the local level by liberal governments, as I might add. But yes, this was a pain from the beginning, and this was an argument from the beginning. And up until Monday, we didn't know whether we were going to be voting yesterday or not. And I've got an anecdote. I didn't have any documentation to it from Dan O'Donnell. I listened to that on my way to work yesterday, and I'll paraphrase it as best as I can, but let's look at what some of the other conversations are going on about this first. This is ridiculous. Wisconsin holds its primary election in the middle of a pandemic. This is from Eric Bradner over at CNN. Long lines of voters, many of them wearing face masks, stretched for blocks through Milwaukee early Tuesday as Wisconsin held its primary in the middle of a pandemic. Republicans, who have insisted on keeping the election on schedule, won two legal battles Monday as the state Supreme Court blocked Democratic Governor Tony Evers' bid to delay it until June, and the U.S. Supreme Court reversed a lower court's ruling that gave voters 6 extra days to return their ballots by mail. Every other state with an election should be scheduled for April postponed their contest or shifted it to by-mail voting only. But Monday's court decision means Wisconsin, with 2,511 reported cases of coronavirus and 85 dead as of late Monday night, is pressing forward though votes won't be counted until at least April 13th. It has positioned Wisconsin as the first battleground over voting rights in a year, which the question of how elections are conducted could be shaped by the coronavirus pandemic, as Democrats seek funding for expanded vote-by-mail options across the nation, and Republicans express concerns about election security. Lines early Tuesday as voting began were long, so many poll workers quit that Milwaukee consolidated its 180 polling places down to just 5 locations, and in those locations voters stretched around multiple blocks. Staffing at polling places look different. Nearly 300 of the state's National Guard troops will be replacing volunteers who quit. So why couldn't the National Guard man all of the other polling places in Milwaukee? That I don't understand. And thousands of people requested absentee ballots ahead of last week's deadline, but they won't receive those ballots in time to mail them back. According to data reported by local clerks to the Wisconsin Elections Commission, these people will be forced to choose between voting in person or skipping the election. Dressed in full medical protective gear, a mask, gloves, and a gown, Republican State Assembly Speaker Robin Vos, who said he'd been instructed to wear the equipment, volunteered at a polling place in Burlington. Vos had opposed the efforts to make Wisconsin's election a by-mail only contest and successfully fought in court to force the election to take place without delay. He told reporters Tuesday that you're incredibly safe to go out. He blamed Milwaukee city officials for failing to open more polling places as lines stretched for hours there. There it is, right there. And again, this didn't happen in places like where I live. I was in and out in 10 minutes out of my polling place. No problem whatsoever. This only happened in places like Milwaukee, so you gotta wonder what's going on there. It made no sense to cancel the election and just push it off to a future date with no idea how it was going to work and no better plan than people have done right here today, he said. We have no guarantee and it's going to be any safer in June than it is right here today, Vos said, noting that there's a chance that this virus is going to come back sometime in the fall. Vos also gave voters inaccurate information. He said thousands of people who requested absentee ballots that hadn't yet arrived in the mail could call their local clerk on Tuesday and ask for absentee ballots to be emailed to them. This was false, Wisconsin Elections Commission Administrator Megan Wolf said Monday night. So, here's the deal with what's going on in Wisconsin right now. Way back in the beginning of March, the question was brought up as to whether or not Wisconsin was going to continue to have its primary election day on April 7th. The question was asked the first week of March when all of the lockdown orders started coming down across the country and across the states. And Tony Evers said, no, that's fine. We'll just keep it going. We don't need to worry about anything else right now. And I was listening to Dan O'Donnell, a local radio DJ, yesterday morning on my way to work. And he pointed out the fact that this is not just a primary election. That's all that CNN cares about, but this is not just a primary election. There was a state Supreme Court seat that was up. And it was a Walker appointee that was up for the vote right now. They were trying to get him out of there. And according to O'Donnell, and I've not seen documentation to corroborate this, I've been looking all morning, the numbers were starting to come in from early voting, and they weren't looking favorable to the challenger to Dan Kelly. They were not looking favorable to the progressive challenger from Madison who was trying to unseat him. And with that, starting late last week, just a couple days before all this happened, Tony Evers came in and he decided that it was time to try and get this shifted to a later date. When he had a month to prepare for this, I would have been okay with this going on and the legislature and the governor working together to move the election forward. If they'd have done it early and right away as soon as they knew this was going to be a problem. But they waited. And they waited. And they waited. And then, just a couple days before we were going to gather to the polls, then they decided it was time to do something. And the Supreme Court rightly blocked them because they had a month to prepare for this. They knew this was coming. They knew this was going to be an issue. They had a month to prepare. So, good on the Supreme Court. And then the U.S. Supreme Court, too, issued an injunction and made sure that, They ruled in the favor of election integrity. So, if you're going to do this at the last minute, I smell something wrong with this. And of course, because it was at the last minute and the legislature is against the governor and they're Republicans, the governor now and most of these news outlets are trying to blame the legislature for blocking it when you had a month to prepare for this. This is just like the omnibuses over and over again. You wait till the last minute, then you try to blame Republicans for it. You wait, you push through a garbage omnibus with tons of spending, and then when nobody goes for it and nobody reads the damn thing, then you blame Republicans for blocking it. So this is exactly what's going on here. Let's see what Slate has to say. By a 5-4 vote, SCOTUS lets Wisconsin throw out tens of thousands of ballots. The conservative majority just approved one of the most brazen acts of voter suppression in modern times. This is from Mark Joseph Stern over at Slate. On Monday, by a 5-4 vote, the U.S. Supreme Court approved one of the most brazen acts of voter suppression in modern history. The court will nullify the votes of citizens who mailed their ballots late, not because they forgot, but because they did not receive ballots until after Election Day due to the coronavirus pandemic. As Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg wrote in dissent, the court's order will result in massive disenfranchisement. The conservative majority claimed that its decision would help protect the integrity of the election process. In reality, it calls into question the legitimacy of the election itself. Hey, we've been hearing for the last 3 years that every election that a Republican wins is illegitimate. Wisconsin has long been scheduled to hold an election on April 7th. There are more than 3,800 seats on the ballot and a crucial state Supreme Court race, but the state's ability to conduct in-person voting is imperiled by COVID-19. Thousands of poll workers have dropped out for fear of contracting the virus, forcing cities to shutter dozens of polling places. Milwaukee, for example, consolidated its polling locations from 182 to 5, while Green Bay consolidated its polling locations from 31 to 2. Governor Tony Evers asked the Republican-controlled legislature to postpone an election, but it refused. So he tried to delay it himself with an executive order on Monday, but the Republican-dominated state Supreme Court reinstated the election, thereby forcing voters to choose between protecting their health and exercising their right to vote. Because voters are rightfully afraid of COVID-19, Wisconsin has been caught off guard by a surge in requests for absentee ballots. Election officials simply do not have time, resources, or staff to process all these requests. As a result, a large number of voters, at least tens of thousands, won't get their ballots until after Election Day, and Wisconsin law disqualifies ballots received after that date. In response, last Thursday, a federal district court ordered the state to extend the absentee ballot deadline. It directed officials to count votes mailed after the Election Day so long as they were returned by April 13. A conservative appeals court upheld this decision. Now the Supreme Court has reversed that order. It allowed Wisconsin to throw out ballots postmarked and received after Election Day. That is wrong. They can get in for another 2 weeks after Election Day at this point. That is incorrect. They have to be postmarked by yesterday. Even if the voters were entirely blameless for the delay, thankfully ballots postmarked by Election Day but received by April 13th still count as, there's the correction after you made the scary headline. Still count because the legislature didn't challenge that extension. So once again, and here is the biggest problem that I have with this. You knew this was coming. And this goes to the voters that wanted to vote by mail. You knew this was coming. You absolutely knew this was coming. So, this is just ridiculous to me. You knew this was coming. You knew this was going to come when it was going to come. You knew the election day was going to be April 7th, and you didn't plan for any of this. We could have pushed this off until June. That would have not have been a problem. But the process should have started in the beginning of March when Tony Evers said, no, this is fine. We'll just have election day on April 7th, and it's just going to be fine. So, and even then, back in March, you had time to get your mail-in ballot to come in. So, this is what they're trying to do with us. Now we've got one from Madison affiliate, WMTV, NBC 15. Wisconsin Supreme Court candidate says not postponing the election is unfortunate. Wisconsin Supreme Court hopeful Jill Karofsky said it's unfortunate that the election was not postponed and that leaders did not follow the advice of healthcare professionals. There was plenty of time for changes to be made, she said. Karofsky, who was trying to unseat incumbent Dan Kelly, who was part of the Supreme Court's five-person conservative majority. The race is nonpartisan, but Democrats back Karofsky and Republicans support Kelly. Governor Tony Evers issued an executive order on Monday postponing in-person voting to June, but the Supreme Court struck it down 4-2 in a matter of hours. Kelly recused himself, as he rightly should have. He was on the ballot. Karofsky told reporters that Tuesday that the court's decision is another example of how the court is broken. She said there's no way the justices had time to truly analyze Evers' order and that the extent of his emergency powers under the state law before they issued the decision. This creates the perception that the court reached the decision ahead of time. Right, because he did it the day before the election. Instead of 3 weeks ago when he knew this was going to be a problem. Kelly spent Tuesday sending out tweets asking people to vote. And I did the same thing. I asked people to go out and get out the vote, and if they had problems voting, to reach out to me, so I could make sure they knew how to get to the vote. Karofsky has accused Kelly of being corrupt because he constantly sides with conservative groups when they come before the court. You're a Madison liberal, Karofsky. Karofsky herself accepted $1.3 million from the state Democratic Party. She said Tuesday that if she gets on the court, she would recuse herself from any litigation involving the state Democratic Party. She also said she would recuse herself from any challenge to the election's validity if the case directly impacts her. And that is the end of the article. So, that seems to be the big fight that was going on here. And this is from The Intercept. This is from Akilah Lacey. Why Wisconsin is fighting so hard over its Tuesday primary. Amid calls to postpone the presidential primary on Tuesday because of the coronavirus pandemic, Wisconsin state officials have been reluctant to push their elections due to concerns over a key statewide race, an election for a state Supreme Court seat that has the potential to loosen the conservatives' grip on the judiciary. Daniel Kelly, the incumbent judge appointed in 2016, by former Republican Governor Scott Walker, is facing a liberal challenge in his first election from Dane County Circuit Court Judge and former prosecutor Jill Karofsky. In Wisconsin, Supreme Court justices run in nonpartisan elections for 10-year terms, and conservative judges have held the majority since 2008. They currently hold the courts 5-2, and a win by Karofsky could have paved the way for liberals to retake the court in 2023, when the conservative Chief Justice Pat Roggensack will be up for re-election. Karofsky, who was endorsed by Senator Bernie Sanders on Thursday, is a former Assistant Attorney General who focused on cases involving domestic violence and sexual assault, as well as a former Executive Director of the Wisconsin Office of Crime Victim Services. She has spoken about the need for criminal justice reform in the state, while Kelly, who has been endorsed by President Trump, has minimized the need for reform and portrayed Karofsky as soft on crime. On Friday, Karofsky filed a lawsuit trying to block the state's Republican Party from airing ads with false claims about her prosecutorial record. One of the most consequential decisions delivered by Wisconsin Supreme Court's conservative majority in recent years was the 2014 ruling upholding a controversial 2011 law that gutted public workers' collective bargaining rights, a huge blow in a traditionally union-friendly state. The court has ruled against the rights of criminal defendants, including a 2017 decision overturning a ruling that had set a precedent for the rights of convicted people to test DNA evidence relevant to their case. In the court's 2018-2019 term, according to an analysis from Alan Ball, a history professor at Marquette University who runs the blog Scow Stats, the court ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the prosecution in 14 of 16 criminal cases. In another 2017 case, Kelly authored an opinion invalidating a Madison Transit Agency rule barring people on public buses from carrying concealed firearms. The coronavirus pandemic has prompted 15 states to postpone their elections so far. In Wisconsin, Democratic Governor Tony Evers, who initially insisted the election go forward as planned, has moved slowly in response to calls from the state Democratic Party leaders. in voting rights groups, as well as Sanders to postpone the election. Former Vice President Joe Biden declined to take a position, saying it was up to the state. On Thursday, Biden said voting in a polling place was different than a convention having tens of thousands of people in one area, referencing the decision to postpone the Democratic National Convention in Milwaukee. The DNC announced this week it would postpone the convention, which was scheduled for July, to the week of August 17th. Wisconsin Democratic Party Chair Ben Wickler said Wednesday that the state should postpone elections, as called for by local mayors and civil rights groups. The same day, a lawyer representing the state party and the DNC said during a court hearing both groups supported postponing the Tuesday's election. Right, and once again, you had a month to figure this out, so. Lastly, I've got a story from Newsweek here. And this is an opinion piece, but I thought it was interesting. To beat Trump, a woman of color vice president is more than a consolation prize. It's a necessity. Because we want to be able to call anybody who doesn't vote for Biden a racist and a sexist. This is from Amy Allison. Looking at the remaining two white men competing for the Democratic nomination to take on fellow white man President Donald Trump, I feel a familiar heartbreak. A grief known to many women of color whose brilliance is passed over again and again. As we are told to wait our turn, Elizabeth Warren's recent decision to suspend her campaign has compounded this tremendous sense of loss. It's a feeling that has grown since Julian Castro dropped out, followed by Kamala Harris and then Cory Booker. The Super Tuesday contest last week basically sealed the fate of this historic Democratic primary. Either Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden will compete against Trump, ending my dream that a woman or a man of color or a white woman who carries our issues would have a clear shot to lead our nation. But Democrats can't win on grief. They need the enthusiasm of women of color like me to win. Without us, the country will suffer another 4 years of Trump. Only a historic increase in the number of voters of color, especially women of color, will deliver the swing states that Democrats must carry to win. This is what we saw in 2018 when Democrats took back the House of Representatives with a 37% rise in turnout among women of color from the 2014 midterms. This is what we were hoping for in 2020. So how do we get there? How do we motivate voters of color to ensure that 2020 can still be a year of positive political transformation? We get there with a woman of color vice president on the Democratic ticket. Some are calling the vice presidency a consolation prize, but it's much more than that. It's a winning strategy and a likely necessity. So, your woman of color that you're calling for, so you can call everybody who votes for Trump a racist and a sexist, is a political pawn for you, is what you're telling me out of this. Just another chess piece to go in there to try and make sure that the evil orange man is taken out of office. That's all that I'm getting out of this article. And I mean, just right here at the end of this. In 2016, the decision to put Tim Kaine on the ticket was supposed to be the safe choice. But he failed to inspire half the enthusiasm the congresswoman of the squad do every day. That year, the battleground states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania saw a huge drop-off in turnout among women of color who previously voted for President Barack Obama, and the states all went to Trump. So, yes, put up a political pawn, and tell me that you're not trying to run completely on wedge issues. So, on Wednesday, I talk about things that I'm thankful for, and this has been a hard week, definitely for sure, but I'm looking at things. I'm looking at the economy trying to rally at this point. I'm looking at the fact that some people they're starting to get ideas on when they're going to be able to go back to work. And there are new ideas that are forming every day. The entrepreneurs of this country are coming together. We started to be concerned at the beginning that if the restaurants stayed closed too long, they were never going to open back up. And that is definitely a problem, and there are restaurants out there that aren't going to open back up, and other small businesses that aren't going to open back up because of all this, because they didn't have the cash flow to try and keep themselves going amid the government telling everybody that they weren't allowed to go work if they were non-essential. But what I'm thankful for is the fact that there are plenty of people waiting in the wings to step back up and try and do this again, to try and live their dreams of entrepreneurship and reopen these businesses. I said it before when I saw that the flour shortage And then the yeast shortage over the last couple of weeks. People are baking at home. They're really realizing passions for some of these things, and some of them are going to turn it into small businesses. Some of them aren't, but some of them are. Some of them won't be able to get working capital to do so, but with some of these loans being low because nobody's borrowing the money anymore, and buildings being empty and banks not being able to make money off of them, some of these rates are going to go down and people are going to be able to get up, start a business for much less than what they were able to do so in years past. So the entrepreneurial spirit of America is still strong. There's still good ideas out there and still good things to exploit. And that is something I'm thankful for, because this country will recover from everything that the government is trying to keep it from recovering from. And I'm thankful for the American people and their ability to do so. And that is going to be it. We will be back here tomorrow morning with more contemporary and more headlines. I'm sure that there's going to be plenty more to talk about as we move along throughout the day. Until then, I am Jay Edgar, and this is Contemporary.